You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
Do you feel like you're running out of ideas to keep students engaged in classroom lessons? Believe me, I know the feeling. Over the years, I've tried out different games and activities, and I now know which ones are always a hit with the kiddos. I've created a free cheat sheet for you with 15 strategies to engage your students during class lessons. Get it now for free at stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/engage. Hey there, thanks for listening to another episode of School Counseling Simplified. So this week, I want to talk to you about how you can create engaging class lessons for your students. Remember, I mentioned that freebie that you can download where I have 15 engaging class lesson strategies for you. So make sure you head to the link in the show notes to snag that one or go to stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/engage. But today I want to show you a framework you can use to make sure that you're covering all your bases in creating an engaging class lesson that's also going to be rich in content. So here we go, let's dive in. This is a 5-step framework. I call it the Lesson Builder Framework, and it starts with icebreakers. So I love a good icebreaker. You're probably using them a lot already with your students and groups, individuals, whatever. Maybe you've tried them in class lessons as well. But the cool thing about an icebreaker is that you can make it match the topic that you're going to be teaching about. So let me give you a few examples. So once I did a self-control lesson. So I'm teaching self-control, and this was like to kinder or first grade students. First grade, I believe. And so I wanted an icebreaker that would get the kids loosened up and excited, like transition into the counseling lesson. But it would also be related to the content. But I don't tell them what the content is yet. So for example, I just come in and I say, hey guys, I'm here to teach you a lesson today. I'm your school counselor. Let's start with an icebreaker. Here are the rules. You have to stay seated and I'm going to blow some bubbles. Now, the bubbles, you can't touch them, you can't pop them. Even if a bubble lands right on your nose, you're not allowed to pop it, okay? That's the game. So then you play that game, and then, the kiddos have a hard time. They have to sit on their hands. Maybe a few kids just couldn't resist and they popped them, whatever. But after the icebreaker ends, then you regroup and you say, okay, what did you learn from that icebreaker? And you get some feedback. And then you tell them that you're going to be teaching them about self-control, and you make the connection to self-control. How does the icebreaker relate to self-control? So that's what I've done before, super simple. But like I said, you can do this with anything. So try to think of a activity that you can use as an icebreaker to get kids loosened up, excited, getting to know each other a little more. But at the same time, it's a fun way to introduce the topic. So that's step 1 of the framework, is to have an engaging but on-topic icebreaker. Okay, step 2 in the framework is your actual lesson. So this is the meat and potatoes of what you'll be teaching. This is your lesson or activity. Now I say lesson or activity because you can do it a couple ways. You can teach using slides, or maybe you're using a story you're going to read and then you're going to talk to kids about it. So this would be like reading the story, going through a slide deck, showing a video. Or you could do an activity form where they have to kind of teach themselves through activities. So this would be something like if you used an escape room, or if you had them do breakout groups, and each group's going to do a different task, and then you're going to come back together as a class and they kind of teach what they learned to the class. So for example, if it was self-control, one group could be talking about self-control support systems they have to identify. Another group's trying to figure out strategies for self-control, and another group's trying to define self-control. And then they have to come back and teach it to the rest of the class. So that's a way you could use a breakout activity as part of teaching your lesson. Or like I said, you can use a slide deck to teach your lesson. You can just have a script to teach your lesson where you're just teaching the kids. And you can use, supplemental aids like a book to read or a video to show, anything like that. But this is where you're teaching them. This is the actual teaching part, right? And like I said, you can do it directly or indirectly through something like breakout groups. Now, after you teach them, this leads us into step 3 of the framework, you're going to have a discussion. So after you teach them something, we need to talk about it. And we need to discuss, again, you could ask a discussion question. How does, what you've just learned relate back to that icebreaker we did? You can always tie that back in. Or you can have the students get in pairs to discuss, get into small groups to discuss, or a whole class discussion just on, what do you think about this? Has this ever happened to you before? You could do this in a couple ways. You can make it engaging by using, discussion cards. You could pass out some cards to the groups and they do them together. You could do a discussion beach ball. So you could toss a big ball around and have some discussion questions written on it, and whoever catches it has to answer the question. Or you could use like a big discussion dice. So I love to use discussion dice in my small groups, but this is a great way to modify for the class lesson is to buy one of those big dice on Amazon. I'll link to one in the show notes, and then you toss it around the room, have the kids sit in a circle, and they can take turns discussing that way. Now, for step 4 of our framework, we're moving into the reflection piece. So they've already learned the material, they've already discussed it. Now it's their time to independently reflect on this and how it relates to their everyday life. So we want them to make this connection so they can take it with them. So this can be done in a written journal. It can be another kind of activity, but again, this one's independent, but it could be like a cut and paste or a drawing activity, or maybe they're making a collage. It's just some kind of reflection piece that they're doing independently after they've been introduced to the concept through the icebreaker, learned the concept in the lesson, discussed the concept with their peers, and now they're reflecting on the concept independently. And lastly, you wrap it up with data. So data collection, this only takes a couple minutes, but I do recommend that you do some type of data collection in your classroom counseling lessons. This can be as simple as like a little ticket out the door, or you could be more complex with pre-post test or self-assessments. Of course, if you're doing the pre-post or self-assessments, you want to give out one before the icebreaker and then one at this point. But collect any final data that you want to gauge the effectiveness of your class lesson, and then that's it. So I've modeled this 5-step lesson builder framework on a 30-minute class lesson because that's what I usually had. So I'm going to break it down for you guys by the minutes. So your icebreaker should take about 5 minutes. Your lesson, this is going to be the longest portion, about 10 minutes. Your discussion may surprise you. I'm allowing 7 minutes for discussion because you really want to dig deep. Now, of course, if your discussion only lasts 5 minutes, you'll have some more time at the end for reflection. I've allowed 6 minutes for reflection. So that gives the kids enough time to really sit down, especially if they're doing cut and paste or something. And then finally, data collection at the end should only take about 2 minutes. So there you have it. That's how you can use the lesson builder framework to create a 30-minute class counseling lesson that is super engaging and effective. Okay guys, like I mentioned before, I have that freebie for you. It is a free cheat sheet where I'm sharing 15 strategies to engage your students during class lessons. It's super visual, easy to follow. I think you're gonna love it and find it super helpful. So you can get it now for free at stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/engage. Okay guys, I'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.